Welcome, everybody. This presentation by Paulo Lanzarin will be on improving audio and video with WebRTC and BigBlueButton. Paulo has been working on the project for over 6 years, primarily on the media side. So when you think of what you see in terms of Kurento and mediasoup and some other capabilities that Paulo's going to talk about, he is the one leading it. So Paulo, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Fred. So, hi, my name is Paulo. This presentation, which is called Improving Audio and Video with WebRTC and BigBlueButton, will be mostly technical, but make my best to make it accessible. So, a quick agenda of this presentation. First, I'm going to do a recap of how BB's media stack evolved between BB 2.4 and 2.6. Afterwards, I will quickly cover what's in store for our media stack in BigBlueButton 2.7, and then the next steps for the foreseeable future, so BigBlueButton 2.8 and next, and then a quick session of questions and answers. Firstly, who am I? I'm a software developer at MConf Tecnologia. I'm based in Porto Alegre, Brazil. I've been involved with BigBlueButton since 2017. Mostly dealing with BigBlueButton's RTC stack, so that's cameras, screen sharing, audio. Okay, so let's start with the recap. So the last WebRTC focus presentation we had was in 2021. We were in BigBlueButton 2.3 back then, and that at that time we were exploring alternatives to Kurento. Basically, we wanted to transition from Kurento to another client-facing media server that dealt with webcams and screen sharing. So we were in the prototyping phase. We pasted some results of open source media servers. So we explored Janus, mediasoup, Pion, GT. And we were also thinking about, at that time, unifying our front-end media servers. So because at that time and still today we have two client-facing media servers, which is FreeSwitch and Kurento at the time and mediasoup nowadays, and we were trying to unify that complexity. So a quick timeline of what happened between BigBlueButton 2.4 and 2.5 and 2.6. In 2.4, a major architecture change media-wise was that we made a choice and we picked mediasoup as the replacement for Kurento, and we introduced an implementation of mediasoup signaling as an experimental component in 2.4. So a lot of changes, still didn't see much production usage. So a lot of experimentation and testing in this step. And in 2.5, once we were confident enough, the mediasoup implementation was stable and production grade, we made it the default SFU on BigBlueButton, which in fact replaced Kurento as the front-end media server for webcams and screen sharing, with the exception of recordings, which I will expand upon later. In 2.5, we also introduced a new microphone bridge, which was based on mediasoup as well. So our idea of unifying the front-end media servers and taking FreeSwitch out of the client side started here, and we introduced that new bridge as an experimental feature, and it was still feature incomplete. And in 2.6, we are here now. The mediasoup-based microphone bridge is feature complete, still experimental because it didn't see that much production usage yet, but it's mostly stable. And then we improved mediasoup worker distribution mechanisms a bit to make BigBlueButton a bit more scalable and reliable as far as webcams and screen sharing is concerned. To also recap our RTP topology, is still not really conventional. We still use a mixed RTP topology, so we are using an SFU, which is mediasoup now instead of Kurento, and FreeSwitch as an MCU for microphones. Kurento is mostly gone, which I mentioned before, with the exception of recording. So it lingers because mediasoup doesn't provide stream recording out of the box. That's a trade-off we made when we picked mediasoup. which we were aware of. And then we outlined a plan, which is in this issue I mentioned here in GitHub. The first step, which is a stopgap, was to repurpose Kurento as a recording to mediasoup streams. And then there's a more detailed plan to replace Kurento as a recorder as well. So nowadays, this is the current outlook of BigBlueButton's media stack. We have two client-facing media servers, mediasoup and FreeSwitch. Kurento stays in the backend, recording streams from mediasoup. That's mostly it as of 2.6. And then going into 2.7, which will be the next BigBlueButton release, is already in alpha state. The new microphone bridge is the default one, so audio will go through mediasoup instead of FreeSwitch directly, and we will be unifying the client and the front end media server into a single one, which is mediasoup. So the architecture changes a bit more. We have mediasoup in the front end and Kurento and FreeSwitch in the back end. FreeSwitch just does the audio mixing and handles dial-in and SIP integration, and Kurento does recording still. But that's two goals we achieved based on what we had proposed back in 2021. And I'm going to expand a bit on the rationale and motivations and caveats of the new audio bridge. Our initial motivations for implementing this new audio bridge through mediasoup was to unify front-end media server, as I mentioned, to deal with FreeSwitch edge cases, and for that I mean edge cases such as dual stack network environments, which FreeSwitch has problems with, and negotiation failures, etc., which we hoped to fix with a new media server. To get faster initial connection times for microphone, in average at least. FreeSwitch has some problems as well with Firefox mainly regarding connection times, but also Chrome, and we wanted to lower those times. We wanted also to lower negotiation failure rates for audio, and that ties closely to FreeSwitch edge cases. And finally, we wanted to lay a groundwork to phase out the listen-only mode, which I will expand later on why that's important, but that's one of the rationales of the new audio bridge. And caveats, problems we still are looking into is Firefox has a problem with isolate implementations, which mediasoup is one. So there's an incompatibility in implementations. Firefox sometimes fails in negotiating WebRTC streams with mediasoup, and our current workaround is to force relay usage, and that's not optimal for audio, so we are trying to figure out a way to make this live alongside the new audio bridge properly. And there will be a marginally higher CPU usage on the server side. By marginally, I mean the extra CPU usage mediasoup will use for audio streams, which is minimal compared to FreeSwitch usage, so not that big of a problem. And this is a showcase of one of the motivations. So audio failures, I mentioned that we wanted to reduce the rates. And this is an example. We've been testing this new audio bridge for a while now, a long time actually, including on the BigBlueButton's demo servers, which we have two. And here's a comparison of the 2.6 audio bridge with the new 2.7 one. So we set up two servers, one with the old one and another with the new one. And you can see that the older one has much more errors when negotiating microphone streams than the newer one. This scenario is almost 75% reduction in error rates. In reality, so production environments, it's a bit lower. I've personally seen in production environments 50% reduction in error rates, so that's probably good for the health of the project and the end users. And that's it for 2.7. That's the main change. There are other internal changes in the media stack, but mostly adjustments. And now I will talk about a bit about what we are planning for the foreseeable future, and for that I mean BigBlueButton 2.8 or whatever the next version is, and later versions. So for the first thing we've planned and we are actually working on right now is a new recorder. I've mentioned that Kurento still lingers as a recorder for mediasoup streams in the backend, but while it kind of performs well in that role, Kurento has a large footprint of dependencies and still can fail in some scenarios. So we actually want to phase it out completely so we can have a linear build, a linear installation, and a more stable environment. This issue here, which there's a QR code for it, actually lays out the plan to replace Kurento as the recorder. There's a bunch of propositions of alternatives. And what we picked initially is this. We've started implementing a new recorder. It's actually a new service, which is called WebRTC Recorder, that uses Pion as its basis. Pion is an excellent WebRTC library implemented in Go, which is perfect for this sole reason. The initial work was done by Artur Poroshenko, so kudos to him on that. We currently integrated that into 2.7 alpha behind a feature flag because it's very experimental still. Kurento is still there, it's still recording as the default option, but this can be activated. And there's documentation on how to do that in the BigBlueButton 2.7 documentation. We've added Prometheus instrumentation to this new service. We've added stress testing scripts so we can get this right from the get-go. So the current state is this. It's in experimental fashion. And for the next steps, we need to do a lot of work on weeding out bugs. There's probably a lot of bugs still in there, mainly on the recapture and lossy environment handling, etc. So this one is the most important. We need to do a lot of more of stress testing and performance improvements on the new application to make sure it can stand production environments. We are working on adding automated scripts to verify quality and integrity of generated files, because what we actually want to do is guarantee that the new recorder won't be worse and preferably better than Kurento as far as quality and integrity of recorded files is concerned, and then add support for H.264, etc. So as I mentioned, it's experimental in 2.7, and the reason why this is flagged as future and 2.8 plus is because it will be the default when it's production grade. So it will follow probably the same pattern as what we did with mediasoup and the new audio bridge. We put it as an experimental feature. Folks test it. We tested it in production, and when it's better than what we have right now, it becomes default for everyone. But as always, we encourage folks to try it out, and please open GitHub issues, reporting whatever you find. As I mentioned, we are testing it. We added stress testing scripts, and this is an example of how the new recorder is performing, at least as far as server-side performance resource usage is concerned. So this is an early stress test we did during the last BigBlueButton Summit, running into an Epic server with 2 virtual cores. This is 400 recording sessions, which is probably more than the average BigBlueButton session does in a single server at a time, but we had to stress it out. Recording VP8 streams at 200 kilobits per second. So this is basically a default BigBlueButton camera. And the peak CPU usage over 200%, which is 2 cores, was 61.7, which is this peak here. And that's a pretty satisfactory CPU usage per session stream. So that's 15% per stream. For instance, Kurento usage, CPU usage ranges from 0.8 to 1% per stream in a similar setup. So that's a sizable reduction in server-side resource usage, which speaks well of this new application. As I mentioned, a lot of testing still needs to be done, and we need to make sure the captured files are in good quality and with integrity, because it's a sensitive issue. So that's one of the things we are working on for the future. The other one is to phase out listen only, which I mentioned before. One of the reasons we implemented the new audio bridge is to make the groundwork for this. So what's the problem with the listen-only mode? Listen-only mode, from its inception, it appeared as a technical mitigation for an issue which FreeSwitch does as an MCU, and MCU are resource intensive on the server side, and we can just put 200, 300 people in a microphone with FreeSwitch and a regular server and expect it to work reliably, at least on a small server. So listen only was created on that with the intention of mitigating that, but it is an user experience nightmare. Folks are always confused on what they should pick when joining a BigBlueButton session, whether they should join listen only or microphone, how they switch between modes, and etc. And user feedbacks confirm that, and that's what we are trying to tackle. So this, what we actually are trying to do to get rid of listen only, it's still in prototype stage, and it started on the last BigBlueButton summit as well, is that we wanted to make listen only a transparent mode, so internal mode. The end user won't see anything happening, but on the server side, we will make whatever is necessary to conserve server-side CPU usage resources without surfacing that to the end user. So when there's microphone activity, inactivity, sorry, talking channel, so my channel when I'm not talking will be held on the server side. So when a channel is held on FreeSwitch, CPU usage actually zeroes out, and so it basically doesn't really exist. And receiving channel, so what I'm hearing is switched on the server side to listening mode. So the user is unaware, ideally, that this is happening, but it will happen, and we will save server-side resources without having to rely on the user to do that. And then when there's microphone activity again, so the outbound user on the user outbound channel on the user's perspective is reactivated. Channels will be activated again on FreeSwitch. The listening mode will be deactivated on server side, and things will happen as they do nowadays. And there's a small graph here explaining this mechanism. And the idea is that we don't always have too many people talking at the same time in a normal meeting. And when we have, it doesn't really help anyone. So if we have 2 or 3 people talking at the same time, we will have at most 3 FreeSwitch channels active, and instead of 300 channels. This is an early test, a stress test of the prototype we implemented in the summit, again with the same Epic server. This is 16 audio channels with 1 active talker, which is like the scenario we are dealing with here now. The new experimental mode, where the listen-only mode is transparent to the end user, reached a peak of 11% CPU usage, so 0.68 per channel, per audio channel, which is this one on the left. And the default mode, so the mode we use nowadays with free switch and everyone with a channel on free switch, we reached a peak of 27% CPU usage, so 168% per channel. Well, it's 1% more CPU usage per channel. So from this prototype test, the new mode uses just 40% of the CPU usage we currently use in production in a best case scenario. So one talker. We have 3 talkers, it will use a bit more, but it will always ideally use less than what we use nowadays, and we can just get rid of listen only with this. There's an experimental pull request open with this targeting BigBlueButton 2.7. Again, this is an experimental feature. It's not supposed to land in 2.7, but at least my intention is that it lands in under a feature flag, and you can be able to test it and enable it just like the new recorder. There's plenty of room for optimizations in this new in this pull request, so we have to come up with heuristics for defining and constraining the maximum number of active talkers. As I mentioned, meeting with 20 people talking at the same time is not useful, but we need ways to constrain that as not to hinder the end user, and preferably do that automatically. And also better use of mediasoup's capabilities, so pausing and resuming streams, which the prototype doesn't do yet, but if we do that, we can lower CPU usage on the new mode even further. We also need to do some audio quality assessment of this new mode. We definitely don't want to cause quality regressions with audio because we don't have much margin here. And once the heuristics are in place and we are sure there are no quality regressions and listen only is going out for good, we will review the client-side UI for the whole joining audio flow and changing devices and etc. without thinking on listen only. So hopefully the experience is more familiar to the end user, more similar to what other conferencing tools do. And this will definitely reduce end user friction when joining a meeting, etc. Again, this is tentatively landing in 2.7 in a very experimental fashion, just like the recorder. The idea is for folks to test it, report issues, and we'll be developing it in 2.7, 2.8, and future. And it will become default wherever it's deemed production grade. And finally, for the future as well, we are not forgetting about some basic stuff, like we want to dedicate some time to media quality and adaptability. So how do we handle harsh network environments and disconnections and etc.? We are always tweaking this, but the fact that we had 2 front-end media servers always complicated matters a bit here. So now that in 2.7 we will have a unified front-end media server, we can finally work towards cooperating between things that we should never decoupled so much as they currently are. So audio, cameras, and screen sharing right now are totally decoupled because they used different media servers. Now we use a single one, and we want to couple these things further so they cooperate between themselves. So, for example, an end user has a faulty network or a bad Wi-Fi connection, and we want to throttle video and prioritize audio and etc. By unifying stuff, we can do this more easily and more effectively. And also, as for quality is concerned, a unified front-end media server also will also allow us to improve audio and video synchronization once audio and video goes through the same pathway, which is mediasoup. And also we will look into improvements to signaling performance. So the WebRTC SFU signaling server, we want that to be as scalable as possible, even more now that folks are working on a Meteor replacement. So we need to keep up with the new throughput. BigBlueButton will have, and also keep improving mediasoup worker distribution, also for scalability reasons. And that's it on my end. I'm open to questions and etc. So Pablo, I will go backwards on the chat. Pablo asked if is the automatic listen-only mode coming on 2.7 version. Pablo, my intention is for the experimental pull request to land on 2.7, but again, it will be experimental, disabled by default under a feature flag, and you will be able to activate it and test it out and report issues, but again, in an experimental fashion. It will only become default once it's production grade. So Miro asked, how long is the typical delay the server needs for handover if the client unmuted? I haven't generated precise metrics for that yet, Miro, but from development testing, it's pretty fast. So I have not noticed on development environments significant delays on switching between the hold state and non-hold state. So it shouldn't be a perceptible delay.
Paulo, this is great. Amazing work, and basically very systematic improvements over many iterations of the product. Thank you for the presentation. As before, you can hang behind and ask more questions, but we'll pause the recording at this point. And thanks again. That was excellent.
Thanks.